Buenas tardes, bienvenidos a la reunión de alcance público de el Aeropuerto Internacional Austin-Bergstrom para la evaluación ambiental. Nuestra reunión va a comenzar en unos momentos.
All right, welcome everyone tonight to the public scoping meeting for Austin-Bergstrom International Airport Environmental Assessment. The environmental assessment supports the Airport Expansion and Development Program. This program guides construction and development at the airport over the next 5 to 7 years. Thank you for joining us again. We appreciate your participation and input during this phase of the process. You can join us this evening by calling in and listening in to participate. You can do so by phone, dialing the phone number that's provided on the bottom of the screen, 855-925-8501. The phone number has also been provided in the chat.
Bienvenidos a nuestra reunión de alcance comunitario de la evaluación ambiental del Aeropuerto Internacional Austin-Bergstrom. La evaluación ambiental apoya la expansión y el desarrollo del aeropuerto, que guía la construcción y el desarrollo del mismo por los próximos 5 a 7 años. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos. Apreciamos su participación y su retroalimentación en esta fase del proceso. Ustedes también pueden llamar y nos pueden escuchar participando por teléfono, llamando al número que está provisto en pantalla en la parte inferior. El número es el 855-925-8501 y pueden marcar el código 5444 para entrar. Si usted desea interpretación en español, puede escanear el código QR que está en la pantalla y puede ir directamente a nuestra reunión en español. Le recordamos que esta será una reunión grabada. Si usted necesita interpretación en español, yo los estaré acompañando en este proceso y pueden visitar el enlace que está en la parte inferior de su pantalla. El enlace es www.bit.ly/AUS Public Scoping Meeting. Si desean participar por teléfono, pueden llamar al 855-925-8501 y marcar el código 544. Una vez que entren al enlace que les hemos provisto, entrarán a la reunión donde pueden escuchar el audio completamente en español. Solo tienen que ir a la parte inferior de la pantalla a donde está el icono del mundo y seleccionar el idioma español. Una vez que estén en ese en ese salón podrán escuchar toda la reunión completamente en español.
Thank you, Larissa. At this time, if you prefer Spanish, the Spanish interpretation room is now open. Well, good evening again. My name is Ra Shakir, and I'm with ADISA Communications. I serve on the project team, and I'll be facilitating as the moderator tonight. The agenda for tonight's public scoping meeting includes the project team and partner overview, an overview of the airport expansion and development program, as well as an overview of the National Environmental Policy Act, also known as the NEPA process. Finally, this evening, we will dedicate some time at the end of the presentation for questions and answers and our request for public comments. Tonight, housekeeping will be very important. Attendees, as I mentioned earlier, can join by phone by calling the toll-free number that's provided at the bottom of your screen and in the chat. When prompted, you can enter 5444. Once you dial into the meeting, you can simply stay on the line to listen to the meeting. And during question and answer segments, you can press *2 to leave a voicemail, or you can request to speak by pressing *3. You will continue to hear the meeting audio until it's your turn to speak. In addition, tonight, closed captioning will be provided on public input for your convenience. At the end of the presentation, we have allotted time for questions and answers. Please reserve your questions until the Q&A segment. Presenters will be available to answer questions about the environmental assessment process and collect feedback from attendees on environmental categories at the end of the presentation. We will not, however, be addressing questions, comments, or feedback unrelated to the environmental assessment process during this scoping meeting. The project team will be monitoring the chat tonight for any technical or project-related questions. And also, as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. The recording of tonight's meeting and the request for public comments will be available for at least 30 days following tonight's public scoping meeting. Residents will be available to provide feedback on publicinput.com until October 11th. Now, the purpose of this meeting is to present an overview of the environmental assessment process that Austin-Bergstrom International Airport is conducting with the Federal Aviation Administration. We will also answer questions about the environmental assessment process and collect feedback from attendees on the environmental categories. If you do have questions, comments, or feedback regarding the airport expansion and development program, please share by sending an email to airportinfo@austintexas.gov or by calling 311. Joining us today on behalf of the project team are Brian Zinn, environmental scientist with City of Austin Department of Aviation. He is joined today by his colleague, Dave Fool, Vice President of Aviation Environmental Service Group with RS&H. Next, we will have a brief overview of the Airport Expansion and Development Program by Brian Zinn.
Thank you, Ra, and thank you everybody for attending tonight. As mentioned, my name is Brian Zinn, and I am with the Environmental Affairs Division here at the Department of Aviation in the City of Austin. As shown on the slide, we are working with several federal, state, and local agency partners on this project to develop the environmental assessment. Our federal partners include the Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, and the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. At the state level, we're working closely with TxDOT, or Texas Department of Transportation, the Texas Historical Commission, and Texas Parks and Wildlife. And we're working alongside our fellow city departments, the Public Works Department, the Capital Contracting Office, along with Watershed Protection. Next slide, please. Following major COVID-19 impacts, AUS had to re-strategize the airport expansion program to meet our recovery profile. This re-strategized program is now called the Airport Expansion and Development Program, or the AEDP. The AEDP will increase capacity at AUS using a strategic approach, including optimizing the Barbara Jordan Terminal, building a new midfield concourse and connector tunnel, and enabling our future expansion with utility and airfield infrastructure. While the 2040 Master Plan, which was finalized in 2019, serves as a vision for the future of AUS, the AEDP will guide development and construction of the airport over the next 5 to 7 years. Next slide, please. The purpose of the AEDP is to improve the passenger experience, provide reliable air service to Central Texans, provide a safe, convenient, and environmentally sound travel experience to Central Texans, all while reflecting back Austin's values and our unique Austin community. We've launched this environmental assessment process, which my colleague Dave Full will go into more detail in just a little bit, to determine whether or not AEDP projects would significantly impact the environment. Next slide, please. The AEDP includes several individual components. Combined together, these individual components will accomplish the intended purpose and need of the AEDP. The components include new electrical duct banks, a new utility zone, which will include a new south utility plant, a 3-gate west expansion of the Barbara Jordan Terminal, and relocated midfield cross taxiways, or MCTs. Next slide. This next map highlights improvements, including a new electrical substation, new employee parking areas on the north side of Highway 71, utility and catering access improvements, a new midfield concourse and associated apron area, along with a connector tunnel to the existing Barbara Jordan Terminal, along with a construction laydown zone for construction of the midfield improvements. Next slide. This final map shows the reworked arrival and departure curbsides at the Barbara Jordan Terminal, along with an expansion of the arrival hall of the BJT. And lastly, west airfield improvements and a new parallel taxiway to the west runway. I now turn this over to my colleague Dave Full of RS&H, who will be going more in depth about the environmental assessment process and the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA.
Thank you, Brian. The environmental assessment is a review process that is guided by the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. The purpose of the EA is to assess potential impacts of the AEDP and what those impacts may have on the environment. This process will determine whether any significant impacts would occur as a result of the project being proposed at the airport. There are a variety of regulations and guidance under which this EA will be prepared. This will include the Council on Environmental Quality, or CEQ regulations. It will also include the FAA Order 1050.1F and the accompanying desk reference, as well as FAA Order 5054 Bravo, which are the NEPA implementing instructions for airport actions. In addition, the EA must also comply with a variety of federal executive orders, and other applicable federal, state, and local requirements. Next slide, please. On this slide, we show you some of the executive orders that are triggered through the NEPA process. They include, but they are not limited to, regulations regarding cultural resources, floodplains, wetlands, environmental justice, children's health and safety, tribal government coordination, as well as migratory birds. Next slide. The timeline for the preparation of the EA is shown on this slide. You can see that we are at the beginning of the process. This includes this public scoping meeting that's occurring this evening, and also includes a briefing for the Airport Advisory Commission, as well as the preparation of the purpose and need statement. And that is a NEPA term that just basically articulates the justification for the project. And also, we will be working with the FAA on coordination with the State Historic Preservation Officer of Texas. Later this year, on the second arrow in the purple color, the EA team will be conducting the analyses regarding the proposed project. This will include things like the noise and air quality analyses, the cultural resources field work, and the preparation of all environmental resource category study reports. And our next slide will talk a little bit more about what those environmental categories are. At that time, we'll also do a briefing for the Airport Advisory Commission during that period. Early in 2022, at the next arrow in the lighter purple color, that is when we will publish the draft environmental assessment. And that will also be an opportunity for you, the members of the public, as well as any government agencies, to provide comments on the analyses that are contained within the draft EA. And then the final portion of our timeline, shown there in yellow, will also occur in 2022, and that will be the FAA review of the EA and the preparation of their decision document regarding the proposed project. I told you I would talk a little bit about the environmental resource categories. These are all listed here on this slide. I want to emphasize that these are not optional. We have to look at each one of these environmental resource categories as part of the environmental assessment process. I talked about the FAA orders and the regulations. They require us to look at each one of these environmental resource topics. So you can read them for yourself. Each one of them is important, and we have experts on our team to be able to address each one of these topics as we move forward through the EA process. So every EA must analyze the impacts of a proposed project on each of these environmental resources. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Ra, to get to our next part of the meeting.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Dave, for sharing information on the AEDP process, as well as the NEPA process. We'll be asking you guys to join us in just a few as we're moving on to the question, answer, and feedback segment of our meeting. As a reminder, to submit your question today, you can drop your question in the chat on Zoom or on public input. We encourage you to start formalizing your questions now. And as an additional reminder, you can call in using the number and the passcode at the bottom of your screen to participate in this question and answer segment. The information has also been provided in the chat. The question and answer segment will be used to discuss questions about the environmental process, the NEPA process, and public scoping process and timeline. First, we have 3 questions for you to share your feedback. So this is our time to hear from you, the public. After these 3 questions, we'll open up the floor for your general audience questions. Again, we encourage you to use the chat, and you can get ready to just post your questions there now. So at this time, we'll bring Dave and Brian back, as they will be fielding your questions. As Dave mentioned, we also have technical experts on the line for additional questions. All right, there's Dave. And there's Brian. All right, folks, our first question this evening is, are there any environmental issues you would like to see addressed in the environmental assessment? Dave discussed some of the questions, some of the areas in the NEPA process, but are there any environmental issues that you specifically would like to see addressed? We'll give a couple of moments for you to drop your comments in the chat. Tonight, we have project team members who are helping us monitor the chat and the phone line. Angela and Damien are here to help us out. And we'll give just a couple of more moments for you to drop your questions or your comments in regards to this first question. Are there any environmental issues you would like to see addressed in the environmental assessment? All right, first we'll go to Angela and the public input chat. Angela, do you have any feedback in the chat or any comments?
There are currently no questions, no comments.
Thank you, Angela. We do have a comment in the chat from Elias. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name.
Fine.
His comment says, thank you for joining us. Elias, is that you on the line?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
You are welcome to ask your question, yes.
Yeah, thank you everybody for the opportunity. I'm excited about this opportunity with Austin Airport. My question is, and I'm with ASLPM, my question is, during this NEPA process, is there going to be any continuous collaboration with the FAA and the federal government to identify possibility of electrifications of existing and possibly new ground service equipment and buses, typically, which will enable the approval and the identification of OTA grants?
That is a great question. Thank you for your question. We have Brian Zinn here to field that question.
Yeah, thanks, Ra. It is a really great question. Since the environmental assessment and this scoping meeting are currently looking at the environmental impacts, we do ask that you submit that either via our website or by calling 311 or emailing us, and we can definitely get that sent off to an appropriate department to be able to answer that would handle that outside of the environmental process.
Appreciate that, Brian. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. Thank you for attending.
Great, thank you. Before we move on to the second question for the public audience, I just want to check back in with Angela. Do we have any additional comments now that we've given a couple of minutes for the folks viewing from public input to share their comments or questions?
No, we do not, Ra.
Thank you, Angela. We'll move on to our second question. The second question, is there an environmental resource category that's important to you and why? Earlier in the presentation, we had Dave review some of those necessary or required environmental resource categories. Dave, do you want to just speak on that just one moment as people drop their comments in the chat in regards to environmental resource categories?
You bet. So I did show everybody what those environmental resource categories are that are required to be studied. Every airport's a little bit different, but a lot of airports have the same theme, and that people are concerned about the same sorts of environmental resource categories. And for airports, what we've found over many years of doing this type of work is that noise and air quality always are big issues for the general public with respect to any airport development project. But we also have found that cultural resources, biological resources, floodplains, wetlands, surface traffic, they're all issues that can be that can occur at any airport. So those are the types of issues that really do rise to the fore with respect to airport development projects. And that's not to say that some of the other ones that I didn't mention specifically are not going to be of interest to members of the public, but just know that we will be analyzing each one that we put on the slide previously.
Thank you for sharing, Dave. I want to go to Angela to see if there's any comments in the public input chat.
Still no comments, Ra.
Thank you, Angela. We do have a comment here in the Zoom chat from Sam Haynes. How will you use the data for the environmental justice issues in the assessment? Brian, I'll start with you.
I will gladly let my colleague Dave talk a little bit more about that, if he would be so kind.
Sure. So environmental justice is one of those topics that is covered in an executive order. That executive order came about in the 90s when Clinton was president. And it basically says that any impacts that occur cannot disproportionately affect members of a minority community or a low-income community. So we always take a look at the impacts associated with the project and then determine who is going to be affected by those particular impacts and determine whether those are minority or low-income communities. That's of vital importance to make sure that we follow the protocols associated with analyzing those impacts for environmental justice purposes.
Thank you, Dave, for that context. It seems like there's going to be some interesting next steps in that process for environmental justice. It seems we do have a public input chat. Angela, do you see this chat and can you share it with us?
Not see any chats at this point.
All right, I have one here. What are the plans? What plans are there to broaden public input?
Can we get a clarification on what they mean by public input?
The public's involvement in this process. How is the project team promoting the environmental assessment for public input?
Oh, okay. Yes, so we have a project website that is currently live that people can go to learn about the process and be able to track along the timeline on how things are progressing on the environmental assessment. We also have the ability to reach out to us via email. And I believe we also have social media that has been promoting both this public scoping meeting as well as seeking public feedback about the EA and the AEDP. And so we are absolutely open to the public's feedback through any sort of means, including 311 and reaching out to us directly here at the airport.
Fantastic. Sounds like we're covering a lot of different ways to share this information with the community. Again, we know that this is a lot of information to dissect, and that's why we'll be making this available for the next 30 days so that you can share with your community, in essence, to learn more. All right, we have another question in the chat. How will you use the data for, I think we already answered that question in regards to environmental issues. If there are no other questions for number 2, we'll move on to the final question.
There is one additional question, Rob.
Go ahead, Angela. Can you help us out? Who's the question from?
From David Todd.
Fantastic. And what's David's question?
What plans are there to broaden public input? I see that tonight's participation is quite low and appears to consist mostly of facilitators, airport staff, and consultants.
I believe that we answered that, but Brian, and just keeping in mind, we do have our Spanish interpretation audience. If you can just share briefly, reiterate just some of our methods of sharing with the public.
Yeah, absolutely, Ra. So just to recap what I said before on the previous question, we have a project website that the public can go to read more about the EA timeline and the process and the AEDP. We have the public input page where people are welcome to come and provide their comments to us. And they are able to reach out to us on social media, on via email, and then also through 311 as well.
Thank you, Brian. And we'll move on to our last question for the public today before we open it up for general audience questions. Last question. Is there additional information regarding the project that should be added to the project description? All right, Brian, you want to give any context to that last question?
Yeah, we're just seeking for public comments about if there's any particular component of the project that we touched on earlier that the public may be looking for some additional clarification or some additional information on, or if they are wanting a little bit more detail to be given about those components that we showed. Understanding that we kind of touched on the big ticket items, you know, we obviously didn't show utilities.
We're hearing a sound. Could everyone please mute themselves? And Brian, if you could start over from the top, that would be great.
Yeah, sorry about that. So what I was saying is that the feedback that we're looking for about the project description is the components that we showed during the presentation. If anybody wants additional details about those, if they are.
Apologies for jumping in again. We're still hearing that same sound. And we want to make sure that we've got good sound quality for the folks that are listening.
Yeah, I apologize. I think my fan on my computer may have.
Okay. Thought it was someone sneezing consistently. Good evening, everyone.
No, we do not have the 7 dwarfs and sneezing behind.
Okay, got it.
That would be a much more entertaining answer.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I do apologize to the public about that. That seems to be my luck with IT equipment.
Okay, well, we do understand that. Is there someone else who can jump in from the team and help answer the question while you work on that sound issue? Do we have anyone raising their hand from the project team?
So what was are we still talking about the question about what are we doing for public outreach?
No, the question was, the last and final question, is there any additional information regarding the project that should be added to the project description? If you want to give the public any direction on the information we might be looking for a question like that.
Well, I think going to either the EA website, and we also have the website for the expansion program. That's another public website, and that's on the airport's website. And so you can get a link to that, and that is an AEDP project site. I think other than that, we'll be providing briefings. And I think the best way is just to track us on those 2 locations and or contact us. and ask us direct questions. This is a public process, and this is your airport, so we're happy to do that.
Thank you so much for jumping in. Kane, you want to do a quick introduction real quick?
Oh, sorry about that. I was still on the sneezing thing. So, hi, I'm Kane Carpenter, and I'm the environmental manager here at the Austin Airport, and I work with Brian.
Thank you, Kane, for jumping in there. Again, those were our 3 questions. Thank you for sharing your input tonight. As a reminder, these questions will be up for the next 30 days. They expire on public input on October 11th. Did want to open it up. We have about 10 minutes for any additional public questions. Not related to the 3 questions that we asked, but still on target in regards to the environmental process, the timeline, or any questions in regards to this phase. I'm going to take it back to Angela to see if we have any final questions in the chat that we need to address tonight.
No additional questions.
Thank you, Angela.
Hey, Ross, sorry about that. I've joined the meeting again on behalf of my colleague, Rachel, so I am back. So great apologies, everybody. It wouldn't be exciting if we didn't have a hiccup or two.
That's so true, Brian. Thank you for jumping back on. And then we'll check in one more time with Damien. I'm sorry. Damien, are there any additional questions in the Zoom chat?
No,
or on the phone line?
I do not see any questions on the phone line.
Great. As we mentioned, everybody will have an opportunity to ask any questions that might come up following this presentation on publicinput.com. Again, we encourage you to share this information with your friends, family, and colleagues, your extended community. Here's a QR code to access the publicinput.com page going forward. You can save it to your phone. That way, if there are any questions that come up, you know where you can share those questions with the team. We also have some other methods. You can mail in your questions. We've provided the address on the screen, Austin-Bergstrom International Airport, and you can send those questions to the attention of the Environmental Affairs Division, and they're located at 2760 Spirit of Texas Drive in Austin, Texas at 78719. We also have a phone line where you can leave a voice message going forward at 512-530-7531. You can leave a voice message sharing your questions, comments, concerns, ideas, or general feedback. Our last slide for this evening shares some of those resources that Kane mentioned. So to learn more about the EA and the EA process, you can visit speakupaustin.org and the airport page at AUS-EA. To learn more about the AEDP process that Brian talked about tonight, you can visit austintexas.gov/AEDP. And to learn more about the Austin-Bergstrom International Airport Environmental Affairs, you can visit austintexas.gov/department/environmental-responsibility. We've also included the social media handles for the airport, so you can follow all of the activities with the airport. Thank you again for your time tonight. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to our speakers and our presenters and the extended project team. Have a great night. This concludes our meeting. Thank you.